Welcome to Bloodroot Literary Magazine. I'm Doe Roberts. It's June and we celebrate Father's Day. The first Father's Day was celebrated on June the 19th, 1910. In 1924, President Calvin Coolidge gave his support to the observance. But it wasn't until 42 years later, in 1966, that President Lyndon B. Johnson officially proclaimed it a national holiday. And not until 1972 that observance of the third Sunday of June was decreed by law. Well, we won't break any laws here today as we celebrate two outstanding authors and two of the dearest and most gentle souls I know, who will read and discuss poems in a tribute to fathers. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Kurt Glaser from California and our very own Tom Kinder from Vermont. Kurt Glaser's poetry is published in numerous literary publications. He's been nominated twice for a Pushcart Prize. Other awards for his work include a C.H. Jones National Poetry Prize and American Academy of Poets Prize. He earned his Ph.D. at the University of California, Berkeley, and B.A. from Dartmouth College. Kirk teaches creative writing and literature at Santa Clara University, where he also serves as faculty advisor to the Santa Clara Review. Bloodroot is honored to have him as our advisory editor. Kirk is completing a manuscript of poems entitled House of Ash and working on a young adult science fiction novel entitled The Runner Between Worlds. He lives with his wife and daughter in Santa Cruz, California. Tom Carey Kinder writes mostly sonnets and hymns these days with regular rhyme and meter. He is a graduate of Princeton University's creative writing program, where all his poems were free verse. Tom has been a Pushcart Prize nominee twice also. He lives in South Stratford, Vermont, and serves as the pastor of the First Congregational Church in Thetford, United Church of Christ, on Thetford Hill. You can read some of his extraordinary sonnets in the 2008 and 2010 editions of Bloodroot. And now I turn the program over to Kirk and Tom. They will read poems from a few of their favorite poets and some of their original poetry and that focuses on fathers. They will assist us in answering two important questions. How does poetry help us understand the nature and roles of fathers? And how are we shaped by the dreams and fears of our fathers? Kirk, I'll toss the ball to you. Tom, you jump in, and the two of you have a go at it. Kurt, will you please introduce your first poem?
Sure. Thank you, Doe. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be here with both of you to talk about this. I started thinking about this question with My Papa's Waltz in mind by Theodore Roethke, and I'll read the poem first. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. And this is a poem I've taught a lot. It's anthologized a lot. And some of the reasons for that are because it offers itself up to so many great literary techniques, especially paradox, because on both the level of image, the level of idea, and the level of music, with this waltzing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 set against what becomes a big controversy in the class. Is this boy being beaten by his father, or is this boy being joyfully danced around the room by his father? And so it's always fun to let the class sort of wrestle it out, and then you say, aha, maybe it's something of both. That there's this ambiguity in our relationships with each other. And so I've often taught it that way, and go through the imagery and go through some of the play with rhyme and you've got dizzy and easy and knuckle and buckle, which are kind of silly, but then you've got these hard dirt kind of words in there as well. But I realized recently that I think I've missed something in talking about it, and even in this notion of fathers being, the relationship of father and son being ambiguous. And I think it's that last line, still clinging to your shirt.
Yes, yeah.
And I realized that what it's finally about is the son's need to love
Right.
the father,
Right.
to make joy and contact, physical contact, emotional contact, even if it's scary. What is this man really all about? This big man who smells like alcohol and has hard hands, but I need him so much.
That's right.
And so that was something I kind of came to think about for today.
Yeah, it's such an evocative poem. I mean, you get so many little details of what that father was like and what his life was like. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. That camera focusing in on one knuckle, and it just says so much. This was a fighting man. This was he coming from a barroom brawl? And I think that so many poems about fathers are, on one level, just trying to understand them. I mean, we begin with our fathers as these giants and these mysterious creatures, and especially in our generation, at least speaking for my father, he was away. My mother was much more present than my father, and so he was this mysterious being at this age, and to have him come in, I mean, imagine this poor boy, and here comes this father, and so many boys' experiences are this way, that the father just is not the father we were looking for. And so many of our poems, as we get older, are just trying to figure out who was this man and why was he that way, and this poem is just, and clinging to your shirt. I mean, he's still clinging to the shirt. That's why he's writing the poem,
Right.
The poem is clinging to that shirt.
Still clinging to your shirt. Yeah, and some people say, oh, it's because he's almost too scared to let go and move away and be hit. And then someone else will say, no, it's this need to love the father and be close to the father.
And it's probably both.
Yeah. It's also interesting as a poem because his father was, they had he grew roses on like an industrial scale, and so he was a farmer of flowers, but
with thorns.
with thorns, yeah, that's great. But so you think of that. But it's about a working class kind of life. Yeah. It's not about smelling the flowers. Right. It's about producing and selling them and coming home with the dirt under his nails and his hands from that. And then the boy who is going to become a poet, and it makes me think of maybe later we'll talk about Seamus Heaney's Digging, because that's also about the boy becoming a poet with the fathers who were the hard-working farmers.
Yes.
And who am I as a child in relationship to that, as you were saying?
Yeah. Well, maybe do you want to move to that to digging? Maybe that would be.
Yeah, maybe. Why not? Yeah, that's a good idea. This is one of Seamus Heaney, the Irish poet, Nobel Prize-winning poets, from his first book, and for him, it's an ars poetica kind of poems. This is what I'm going to be doing with my life, and staking his ground as a young man, and so it's called Digging. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, as snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father, digging, I look down, till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving the cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather could cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him a bottle of milk. I carried him milk in a bottle, corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, digging down and down for the good turf. Digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like him. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it.
Wow.
That is such a wonderful, wonderful poem. And the hands, I'm just struck by once again the focus on the hands, the between the finger and the thumb, the squat pen, which he returns to at the end. But in the middle, you have the spade, the digging, the actual digging, but you also have those potatoes, those hard, cool potatoes, and just it's just so solid. And what it does is it takes the solidness of the father's work and the grandfather's work, this tradition that he has, and he finds his own solidness, his own way, and it's in that pen. As it's not, it's a way of claiming his place in his line of heritage, and saying, yes, I too am taking up something hard and working with it.
And digging into the soul, into his own soul.
Absolutely.
But it starts as, and what's interesting thing of fathers and sons, it starts as the challenge. Snug as a gun. I've got something here to kill.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's right.
Exactly.
But it turns into an homage to both father and grandfather, and yet a claim of difference, a similarity, as you're pointing out. I too have this hard work to do.
Yeah.
But he's sort of saying, it is hard work, darn it, believe me.
Yeah.
And honor, and yet honoring them by using his own hard work with just the detail of language, the lug, the shaft, the squelch, the spade, all the words that are of that world and of those tools. So he's sort of honoring what they do.
Yeah.
I think those hard potatoes underground is a kind of like digging into one's past,
That's
into
right.
the soul, into.
It's about the size of a heart if it's a red potato. So the other thing is that one of the little things I love about this poem is that it begins, the first thing you see of his father is the straining rump among the flower beds. It's a weak, soft kind of image. I mean, you get the idea he's an old man, and he's puttering around in the flower beds, and so there's that. You put that together with the gun, and you're really thrown off a little bit at the beginning of the poem. Like, where is this going? I mean, you don't know. And so it's really beautiful how it then moves into this tribute and this appreciation.
Yeah. Then for me, for many years, I kind of almost didn't notice the flower beds because it so quickly goes to him digging up potatoes.
Yeah.
And then you realize, I think it's true. There's a kind of maybe weakness, but it's also like my father has his idea of beauty and aesthetics.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and poetry.
That's right.
What's
That's right.
poetry and flowers are not useful.
Right.
Potatoes are essential in that one pragmatic sense, but now he's suggesting that poetry is just as essential to his life, and the flowers in a way had some aesthetic essentiality for his father. So it's a way of building a connection.
Yeah, and the pen can cultivate flowers, or it can dig potatoes.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's
The pen's more versatile than
It's
the
the
spade.
archaeology. It's the archaeology of the paradoxes in this poem.
Yeah,
too.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Digging is a big metaphor.
It's a lovely
And that's,
poem.
and that's what we have to do with our inheritance.
Yeah.
Dig into it. And
Yeah,
try to
And-
understand it.
Right, and with our fathers, and figure out where we where we are in relation to their work and to their life.
Yeah.
And, maybe that'd be a good segue to read this poem by Wendell Berry about his father,
Yeah,
because I think that he is wrestling with that relationship and how to navigate it, and how to negotiate it. More confrontational. This is from his book Entries. Wendell Berry is a poet in Kentucky, living poet, and is a farmer and as well as a writer. He chose to go back to his home, back to the lands of his father and fathers and mothers, forebears, but it wasn't easy, as you can see in this poem. I was at home alone. He came to fight, as I had known he would. The war in Vietnam was on, and I'd spoken out, opposing it, and so, I thought, embarrassed him. Not because he loved the war, he feared for me, or for himself in me. Fear angered him. He was my enemy. His mind was made up like a fist. He sat erect on the chair's edge as on a horse, would not take off his coat. That was his way. My house was not a house in which he would consent to make himself at home that day. The argument was hard and hot. Tempered alike, we each knew where the other's hide was tenderest. We went past reason and past sense, by way of any eloquence that hurt. He leaned. I saw the brown spot in the blue of his right eye, forefinger hooking through the air. He said I had been led astray, beguiled by he knew who, by God. And was I then to be his boy forever? Or his equal? Or his foe? His equal and his foe? By grace, I think it must have been by grace. I told him what I knew. Do you know who has been, by God, the truest teacher in my life from the beginning until now? Who, by God? You, by God! He wept and said, by God, I'm proud.
Woo! That's powerful. Powerful. Beautiful reading, Tom.
So you see how he's trying to work out. His father had grown up a farmer and had been sent off to college and had come back home a lawyer, but somebody who was a lawyer on behalf of farmers and was very much tied to the farm, lived still a lot of his life on a farm and worked on a farm. And Wendell Berry came home, went off to college having been brought up in this world of farming mostly, but with the law there. And he came home a writer and a farmer. And so this writer and this lawyer, who feel both very passionate about the world, about society, about the land, about all these different things, are going head to head here and trying to figure out who they are in relation.
That was a great poem to follow the digging poem.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
The intimacy that he conveys about his relationship to his father, just the things, noticing that one little speck in the eye, something you've seen since you were a child, and the hook of the finger and the way he sits, and just you get the sense of, without him saying, I love and respect this man, you get that sense of it through those kinds of details. And then that moment of this, seeing this as a defining moment in a relationship between a father and son, it's so powerful. What's going to happen? Are they going to never speak again? And then Grace steps in and helps move it in a new direction.
Yeah.
Without either of them having to give up, in the poem at least, their stand. They're both standing there, but they can find that connection still.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's, one thing I was thinking about preparing for this was there are not a lot of poems that sort of give us positive models for fathers and sons or parents and children, and yet this does.
This
because
really does,
It's
yes.
it's not about I give up for him or he gives up for me. It's about finding that ground of being able to negotiate and
That's right.
to honor each other.
Right. Neither one has given up their position, and you get the sense that neither one ever would. But they have been able to reach across that divide
Yeah.
and say, "You are my teacher, and by God, I'm proud."
Yeah.
You know, and that just it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And Barry went back home again. So many of us leave our fathers and never go back. We just take care of the problem by leaving it unresolved, by escaping it, by running away from it. And he really engaged him. And I think to my own relationship with my father, which was not an easy one, where there were times when I had to speak up and be his equal and his foe, and those were defining times. They were empowering times.
Well, I wanted to ask you if you had that defining moment in your relationship with your father, and it sounds like maybe you did.
Yeah, I've had a few. I had a few over the years where some where he stepped in and was able to offer some advice or some support at a crucial time, and I was able to accept it, but not as a boy anymore, but as a man, and kind of man to man. And then other times when we fought, and when I was outraged at what he was doing. And it was interesting because there were a lot of times when I was caught between my father and my daughter, and so I was trying to negotiate my position between the two, and sometimes that led to conflict because he would not approve of things. He didn't approve of me when I was a boy, and he didn't approve of. I think he just didn't approve of the teenage years. I think he could have just done well getting rid of the teenage years. So when my daughter was a teenager, there was some tension, and I had to.
Have you written a poem about that conflict between father and daughter? And
Well, I've got I do have. I have one. I guess I could share it if you
Share it.
Well, it's not. It's an odd poem, and it's just in a draft form. So I apologize. It's rough, but it is an interesting moment, and I think it's trying to grapple with this. So I think I will read it. I have to say a little bit about it. Defenestration. Defenestration is not a word we use every day. Defenestration is being gotten rid of by being thrown out the window. And in the city of Prague, there were some famous defenestrations that were where revolutions happened by people being thrown out the window. So that's very important. This is to the poem. This is called "Forgiving Defenestration as a whole way of being gets thrown out the window." My father does not understand my daughter. Why spend 3 weeks in Prague? What happened there besides some minor works of feud and slaughter? Some architecture, old-style streets, a square, but nothing that has shaped your life or mine. No history to speak of, no fine art. Even New York, 1 week, you look, you dine, but stay 3 weeks, that apple gets too tart. And yet, dear Father, some have lived for years in New York, yes, and spent whole lives in Prague. Stay one place long enough, and God appears. I've sat an hour now on this ridgetop log. It may not look like there is much to do, but 3 weeks here, and I might pardon you.
ooh,
That's a sonnet. I don't know if you could hear it in it, but it's a sonnet in classic Shakespearean form. So just that's the poem. But.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Well, that makes me want to read one of mine because of the mentioning sitting on the log for an hour.
Yeah.
Because it's a poem about thinking of my father while sitting somewhere for a while. And
Do you want to talk a little bit about your father?
Yeah,
I think that might be a good thing.
It's important for the poem because I think, well, my father drowned when I was 16, and I found him, and it was in the family swimming pool at night. He would go out and do laps every night, and he didn't come in, and I found him. And we had been scuba divers together, and I knew mouth to mouth and tried to resuscitate him, but it didn't happen. I actually have another poem that is about before he dies, scuba diving together and worrying about him having an epileptic attack, seizure while scuba diving. And that's probably what happened when he was swimming. So I didn't have too many of those defining moments because we weren't together long enough for them to happen, although he was a very loving man, very physically intimate in a good way, but he had a tongue that could cut. But anyway, this poem is thinking about him many years later. I was probably in my 30s I was in my 30s when I wrote this. And I think it explains itself, the story in it, but that background is helpful. It's called The Tribe of Singers. One Saturday at breakfast, after cartoons, I listened to how you prayed as a child every morning, hours on the weekend, in Hebrew and English. A new twist to the familiar tale of singing in the temple. We were Levites, the tribe of great singers. Not so bookish as the temple priests, our singing was full of God. I sit on a rock hillside in the Inyo desert, still for an hour, struggling in my practice, focus on breath and sensation. Eyes shut to the east, where the Sierra Range sky smolders rose yellow before sunbreak. I repiece the distance between us then, father and son simplified by years of holding nothing but memory of you. Appalled by the television I would miss, thinking of all that praying, did you sense my tedium, the reason you left me with just a sketch of your daily struggle, or was it because one day's prayers blurred into the next? No more to tell, really. The boredom of a child forced to sit reciting words in a language half understood. You must have read me clear through as I squirmed before a plate of pancakes and syrup, hoping for a friend to show up to escape to the pond where frogs squatted, caught or shot with BBs before lunch. The crouch and lunge and drop in mud, my notion of obedience to a summer's Saturday. Between breaths, I recall a look in your eyes when the story stopped. A sadness, pain, I'm not certain. What is the truth in the mind attending to silence as memory unravels before it? Maybe you said no more to ease the loss of watching me choose the world, where the difficult mysteries you were offering, of Tefillin bound to the skull, the Torah rigid and endlessly argued, the generations of prayer uttered from the back of the throat, all slid from the bright surface of screens, submerged in an endless flow of goods. Instead, you gave yourself to my games those weekend days, to your garden by the pond you hewed from mud and rock, sowing seeds wrapped in the stories you had nowhere else to plant. So this morning, I sit, belly empty from 2 days fast, in the Inyos, land of spirit, no desert of your fathers, but this land's people also chosen, also beaten, also a remnant surviving. I chant a few words of half-understood Sanskrit, struggling to obey breath, follow the flow of sensations from head to toe, observe with equanimity the squirming mind as I cry for a vision, and you fill me with your song of loss.
Mm-hmm. Wow, mm-hmm. Wow, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. And what a powerful encounter. And
well, you both had powerful encounters with your fathers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are parallels I'm hearing here, too.
Yes. But I love this. I love the connection that you are getting this inheritance that's coming decades later on a spiritual level. That is a spiritual gift, a legacy, and coming from that one moment that you show us, that glimpse, that beautiful glimpse of the Saturday morning cartoon, and yes, that you were really like, I'm into cartoons.
Yeah.
I am not into Hebrew.
Thinking about your life in Manhattan as a Jewish boy going to temple on Saturdays.
Right.
Boring.
Right. Exactly. And did you get the sense? Do you have the sense that he missed that? I mean, was he holding that up? Was he saying, back in my day, or do you think he really? No, he didn't miss it.
I don't think so.
On some level, there was a loss.
Yeah.
That he gave up something to be the father
Right.
in the mid to late 20th century in a world that wasn't the world that he came from exactly.
Right.
I mean, I think he was very content in a lot of ways, but I think there was a seed in that story. For me, thinking about the story years later was realizing what I couldn't hear as a child. And first the mind is like, oh, why couldn't I respond? Well, I couldn't. I was a child. And then, but then, so what? Why is this coming to me now? And I think it's, and another connection I hear between us is, you're sitting on the log. This need for going deep and the spiritual journey is a way to understand our fathers.
Absolutely, whether they're living or dead.
Whether they're living or dead.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and to realize the inheritance that, his life, he wasn't choosing to try to live that life, but there was that seed that was important to him that I got through that
But
story.
also he gave up some of his desires in his career because of his father. Because of his father.
Because of his father.
Yes.
Yeah.
So his career took a turnaround,
Right.
and he gave up what he really wanted to do.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's another kind of inheritance from our
And it
fathers.
is.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of his loss and part of what he was feeling and going back to his spiritual roots.
Yeah.
And I think you say that wonderfully in the poem.
Yeah.
That's great. Tom, what do you have for us?
Well, I'm trying to think how to follow that up. Yeah, I think I want to share this poem by James Wright called "Youth," which is about his father. James Wright's family lived in Martins Ferry, Ohio. Martins Ferry, Ohio happens to be where my father's office was. So I grew up just a few miles from there, so he's talking here about the Ohio River Valley, about Martins Ferry, Ohio. It mentions the Hazel Atlas Glass factory in Wheeling, which is where his father worked. I'll read it. Youth by James Wright. Strange bird, his song remains secret. He worked too hard to read books. He never heard how Sherwood Anderson got out of it and fled to Chicago, furious to free himself from his hatred of factories. My father toiled 50 years at Hazel Atlas Glass, caught among girders that smashed the kneecaps of dumb Honeyoks. Did he shudder with hatred in the cold shadow of Greece? Maybe. But my brother and I do know he came home as quiet as the evening. He will be getting dark soon and loom through new snow. I know his ghost will drift home to the Ohio River and sit down alone, whittling a root. He will say nothing. The waters flow past, older, younger than he is or I am. I just really appreciate how evocative it is of his father. I think that's a lot of what this poem is doing, is evoking and bringing out. But it begins and ends with this silence, and it's once again, and also he's sitting on the river bank whittling a root alone. You know, there it once again is this meditation, this going within, deep within, to the root. To whittling a root, you know, whittling a root. What an image! There is a sense that we're going to find the meaning of this father relationship deep, deep within. And he's a strange bird. His song remains secret.
I love that.
And then he's going to sit down and say nothing. So that's the only way that he's going to get any answers or make any sense of this man's life, and who he is inside him is going in through that silence. And you know, it's interesting. I think the father-child relationship is such a crucial part of religion. I mean, you think of you know, in both in the Judeo-Christian tradition, you know, it's God the Father. In Native American, where you were, you know, it's grandfather. It's the father. There is this way in which it's essential to our spiritual understanding. So what we're talking about today is so deep in so many ways. It's deep because it really gets, you know, at our gut, at our childhood, at our deepest place, but it's deep beyond that. It's deep beyond deep. It's something deeply spiritual about it, and that's coming out. You know,
It certainly does
yeah.
come out. And all of this work we're hearing.
Yeah, to choose a root, that's so whittling a root.
Whittling,
Go back to
yeah.
potatoes, right? Whittling away at something, you're paring it down until
You're taking
eventually
away,
you're
yeah.
taking away until there's nothing if you keep doing it.
Right.
And the river, you know, that's older and younger, and I love that last line. You know, than he is, or I am.
Yes, isn't that fabulous?
Yeah.
You know, just it's some statement about being,
Yes.
and being is, you know, the flow of waters. That you know, Heraclitus, you never step in the same river twice.
Right.
You know, that it's always changing.
Right.
And you know, it was 50 years at this factory, and you think that nothing changes. You know, it's just day in and day out this drudgery. And I mean, there's that in the poem too, of just sort of the son recognizing the father's life's
Yes.
being caught in a life, being
Yes.
trapped, and yet it passes, it moves, it changes.
Yeah.
And by the end, there's this realization that it's all flowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And James Wright himself read Sherwood Anderson and was furious to free himself. I mean, he
Right.
you know, Wright was his parents had both dropped out of high school to work, and James Wright was the valedictorian of his high school class. He went on to Kenyon College, where he graduated summa cum laude. I mean, he was got his PhD. He was driven, and you know, furious to free himself from his hatred of factories. You know, I know he worked in the factories. I worked in some of those factories when I was a boy, and I was furious to free myself too. I'll tell you, they were not good places to spend time.
Don't recommend factory life, huh?
Well, you know,
Not if you're a poet.
if you're a poet, you know, and that was Wright's life, was was poetry and literature, and
It's powerful.
so
All of these poems are so powerful. And your original poems, both of you, they just blow me away. They're wonderful. Let's switch over to you now and see what you have. Do you want to read from...
Well, I think I want to read an original poem as sort of maybe lighten it up a little bit. A different, moving from talking about the fathers before us to, this is a poem about my becoming a father.
wonderful.
And it's called antepartum, instead of postpartum, ante before. So this is right before my daughter, Rhiannon, who's now 13, was born. And it's thinking about, it is a poem thinking about what is my inheritance to her.
Yeah.
You know, what is it, when do we become fathers? You know, it's,
Right.
and if it's the moment we have a child, we're all in big trouble, right? We're seeing the roots of becoming a father are thinking about our fathers.
Where do
before
fathers
us.
come from?
Where do fathers come
Right,
from?
right, yeah.
So this is some of my thoughts. So it's like a prayer for my daughter before she was born, called antepartum. None of us know how, having come this far, to stop our hurrying. And I wait for you to hurry into this world. The other night, I pressed my middle finger against your head through the wall of the uterus, where it rests, pressed against the pubis, lowering daily now from station to station. You kicked at the other end of the womb. Ready, you said, or careful, or just surprised by this dense probe from the dark. I won't pretend to speak for you. I won't pretend my joy is not real, if simple, wishing time to scurry and you to enter my world, even if I know better, or worse, the long view, that your flesh, too, will find its limited perfection and suffering. Better maybe not pulled up through the soil again, and yet the body offers the best depths I can speak of, flecks of sinew and bone, peace in pockets of breath. I'll treat it as a gift to you, yours freely already to choose to do and know with as you wish or can conceive. All that's left, for me, is the love dressed in scraps of thought and care I've managed to gather in 36 years, which I'll give and give until mine is worn bare as the spirit.
Beautiful, beautiful.
That's the other thing, fathers need to think about, is they are, in a sense, giving their lives to their children, or part of their lives.
That's
to
right.
their children.
That's absolutely right. Yes. Yeah. And you asked about how did you put the question at the beginning about how we are shaped by the
dreams and fears.
dreams and fears of our fathers.
Yeah.
And here you are at that, you are dreaming and you are fearing, just, right there, and that's a beautiful beautiful picture, and that is what you are bringing in to your fatherhood, is your dreams and your fears. I mean, this is looking at the question from a different angle, which is that, how do we use our fears and dreams? How do we give our fears and dreams
How does
to
it
our
shape
children?
us? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
and how-
I know you've
more
written about
conscious
your
of it.
daughter too. I don't know if you brought that point,
Yeah,
but we did
I actually-
publish one of them. I know in
Oh,
Bloodroot.
yes, right, yeah. No, I didn't bring that one, but I do have one that actually is, I think, relates to this fears and dreams. And,
Sonnet?
it's a sonnet, yeah. It's another sonnet, another Shakespearean or sonnet. And it is titled, Why It Is Worth It. After a silly movie's brief distraction, before the lights came up, my grief came back. My daughter heard the sigh of my reaction and asked my thoughts. And so I shared the track my mind had taken, thinking of the room my father lay in, sick, alone, and scared. And how our lives, hers, mine, would share his doom. And in my gloom I missed the fact she cared. But now that she is gone, again I see the reaching of her eyes through that dim light, a look that she had never given me, a bloom no longer self-absorbed, curled tight, a girl turned woman. Overnight, it seemed. A father's lonely grief and fears redeemed.
Gives you chills.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful. Absolutely, Tom.
That
Beautiful.
moment of her, of you seeing, realizing that change in
The
her,
bud becoming the flower. Yeah.
and that was, it's a two-way gift, because you have the gift of her actually seeing you and feeling your grief, and then you were realizing it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yes, it is beautiful.
And my father, meanwhile, in the background, far away in this room where where his fear is for his own life at this point, and his grief, his lonely grief and fears, and my lonely grief and fears, and it all is redeemed by seeing this child become a woman,
And caring.
and caring and having a caring heart. Yeah,
Oh, that's so wonderful.
yeah,
Well, both of your fathers did have caring hearts. That comes through in what you're saying.
yeah.
Why don't we do one more piece?
okay.
And
One more.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is not the light poem I wanted to end on. But I think that that it really relates to what we've been saying. So I'll read this one, but only if you promise you'll read one after this.
Okay, I'll try to read something light.
Okay.
And,
This is called Damning and Praising. And this is a hard one for me to read, and it's two sonnets. It's a mirror of sonnets. You have the regular sonnet going in, which ends with a couplet, and then a couplet and the sonnet
cool.
going out.
cool.
So damning and praising. The snapping belt that chases me upstairs. The pointed carving knife that stabs bad manners. His steel-rimmed glasses framing steely glares. Belittlements writ large. Sarcastic banners damning with faint praise. Scoffing, sniping scorn. No telling what rage next would launch attack, or why, or what I did. I just was born, I guess, and this is how he got me back. Oh, but my father hid the tyrant well, and how I loved him, won by strengths and charms. And that is how it always is with hell. The devil's power is in how he disarms. The boy lets down his best behavior guard, and smack, the devil's pitchfork hits sharp, hard. Of course, pain also is the way of God, who sometimes with a surgeon's hand will prod and pry and cut, removing bad from best, whose burning judgment cauterizes, probes, and purges wounds, yet mends us, stitched and dressed, whose end is wholeness, making Christs of Jobs. The suffering my father's rage inflicted came out of nowhere, scale at least unfair, and made my gut ache chronically constricted. And yet, a drive and life force rise from there, part will to fight off tyranny and wrong, but part drawn up by urging from above, the time he squeezed my arm and judged it strong. His gifts, however grudged, that I judge love. So.
It's fantastic.
I'm really impressed at how the poem stayed in the realm of quote unquote more the abstract, and yet was so riveting that it really held. I guess because it had even though the idea the idea's words were maybe a little more abstract, the emotional intensity was so clear all the way through, and the vision of realization and change going on through that just really holds all the way through. And I only noticed that because when he grabs your arm, it was this really physical gesture in a poem that didn't have a lot of that going on, and then that was a wonderful moment to have that.
It intensifies
Yeah.
the
It
whole
intensifies
poem.
the whole poem.
Yeah. At the beginning, you have his arm, his hands are snapping the belt, going upstairs.
right.
The threatening.
Yeah.
But at the end, he's
That's great.
he's
That's a good
squeezing my arm.
Yeah.
Well,
form is
just
really-
as far as
form's
craft
really-
is concerned, you are an expert with sonnets. They are absolutely
Yeah.
so beautifully crafted.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, because
Bill.
you know
Thank
you can hear the rhymes, but they don't. They're weaving and
Yeah, well,
the
thank you.
rhythms. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just beautifully
Thank you.
done.
I guess it's sort of yeah. So this is a poem, another poem about father-daughter, called Inchworm Spring, and it's about when Rhiannon was I think about 3 years old, and a May morning, taking her out in this sling that she
yeah.
loved to ride.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
In California.
And okay, yeah, this is in California, and I think it explains itself, and I'll try to pace it quickly here. Inchworm Spring. Around the house we go, under oaks and madrones in early light, your legs and arms wrapped round me, slunk in your purple sling. Head at rest on my shoulder. My daughter, you unfold from the night. It's May, and the morning light creeps down the far ridge. Invisible webs tug and snap on my skin as I walk, inchworms, dropping from the canopy of new green, their threads arcing through air to join leaf to branch, branch to trunk, tree to tree. These oak gall worms have bound the house railings to eaves in their unthinking plan of multitude. We stand on the driveway watching them wriggle down, green apostrophes rocking as they release lines thick as rope to them, to us invisible, until a silver thread is caught here or there by sunlight breaking through leaves. Delight for you to watch them fall, sway in a breeze, doubled when Daddy reaches above one, grabs at air, and holds it dangling below his fist. See the thread? The sunlight makes it shine. This is how it travels. This is how it binds itself to an inexplicable future, the tiny shroud of change. It will weave a cocoon with its string and become a moth and fly at our windows at night. Let it go, you say, and I do. I squat so you can watch it twist on the asphalt and crawl over the rough terrain searching for leaf. A thatch ant pounces from the red and black stream of its kind flowing across the driveway, their chemical trails a neural web spreading from the metropolitan mound. Fat worms, seize the day. The fire-headed ant bites at the worm and bites again, then clings, curves its black abdomen under to spray formic acid, spindly legs tapping over the larval flesh that writhes until, stunned still, the infant worm surrenders and the ant begins its desultory journey home. Stooped low, trying to explain hunger and need, the balance and cruel extravagance we call nature. I see the dancing electric paths of 10,000 ants, the light-dangling worms suspended in air, the multitude caught in calcium jaws across the ground of our home. I look up, and you follow. 1,000 worms glisten and waver, and my mind tries to harbor the day's work of ant, worm, bird, and leaf, and all that gives itself between this patch of earth and sky. You point to a worm gliding past us, an ant on the ground, and call, "More!"
Well, thank you, Kurt Glazer. Thank you, Tom Kender, for sharing your amazing readings and insights with us. You certainly answered our questions. Please visit our website, bloodrootlm.com, for more schedules with new and exciting things are coming up all the time. And I want to thank CATV, and I thank you for your literary interest. For Bloodroot Literary Magazine, I'm Del Roberts.